Elena, you should be grateful we even let you sit at this table after you humiliated this family by choosing a career in bedpans instead of a real profession like your sister. My mother spoke loudly, her voice cutting through the clinking of expensive crystal at her 35th anniversary dinner. I am Elena Collins, a 32-year-old emergency room nurse, and I was the one who paid for every ounce of that Wagyu beef she was chewing. I did not scream. I just set my fork down and looked at the silver spoon in her hand, the fake one. Before I tell you how I dismantled their lie, like and subscribe, but only if you believe that blood should never be an excuse for abuse. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is there right now. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The scent of antiseptic never really leaves your skin when you work 12-hour shifts in the emergency room. It stays in the pores of your hands and the fibers of your hair, a constant reminder of the life I chose, or perhaps the life that chose me. For 10 years, I have been the one people call when the world is bleeding. I have held hands as pulses faded and navigated the chaotic adrenaline of a level 1 trauma center. I am used to crisis. I am trained to remain calm when everyone else is screaming. But nothing in my medical training prepared me for the quiet, surgical way my own family began to bleed me dry. It started 8 years ago, shortly after my father, Robert, had his first supposed heart scare. I remember the night clearly. The rain was drumming against the windows of my cramped studio apartment, and I was eating cold noodles after a double shift. My mother, Martha, called me sobbing. She said the insurance would not cover the specialist he needed. She said they were drowning in co-pays. She talked about the silver spoons, the ones my grandmother Evelyn had left in her will. Those spoons were more than just cutlery to us. They were solid silver, heavy and ornate, a symbol of a dignity our family had lost 2 generations ago. My mother treated them like holy relics. She would polish them once a month, her eyes gleaming with a strange, hungry pride. She always told me that I was too rough, too common to handle them. "These are for someone with grace, Elena," she would say, her eyes drifting toward my younger sister, Brooke. "They are for a life that does not involve scrubbing floors or cleaning up after strangers." When the bills started coming, I did not hesitate. I told my mother to keep the spoons. I told her I would cover the costs. I was making good money as a traveling nurse back then, and I lived like a monk so I could send $3,000 home every single month. I thought I was buying my father time. I thought I was protecting the only legacy my mother cared about. Brooke was always the star of the Collins family. She was 5 years younger than me, blonde, ethereal, and possessed an uncanny ability to make people want to take care of her. While I was studying anatomy and physiology until my eyes burned, Brooke was being crowned homecoming queen. While I was taking out student loans, my parents were dipping into their meager savings to buy her the designer dresses she claimed she needed to fit in at her private college. Then came Julian. He was exactly the kind of man my mother had always dreamed of for Brooke. He was a corporate lawyer with a smile that looked like it belonged on a brochure for a high-end country club. When they got married 4 years ago, my mother was ecstatic. She told everyone at the church that Brooke had finally restored the family to its rightful social standing. Finally, she whispered to me during the reception, her eyes fixed on Brooke dancing in a gown that cost more than my first car. A daughter who understands that appearance is everything. I stood there in my off-the-rack department store dress, my feet aching from a shift I had finished only 4 hours earlier, and I felt a familiar dull throb in my chest. It was not jealousy, it was a profound, hollow exhaustion. I had paid for the catering at that wedding, I had paid for the flowers. My mother had told me it was a loan, a temporary bridge until Julian year-end bonus kicked in. I never saw a single penny of it again. Over the next few years, the requests for money became more frequent and more desperate. My father's health was always the leverage. "He needs a new medication, Elena. It is $800 a month, or the roof is leaking, and your father's lungs cannot handle the mold, but we spent our last savings on his cardiac rehab." I never questioned them. Why would I? They were my parents. I was the successful one, the one with the steady career and the hero job. I moved into a smaller apartment. I drove a 10-year-old sedan with a cracked windshield. I told myself it was fine because Brooke and Julian were living the life we were all supposed to share vicariously. They had a house in the hills. They drove German SUVs. They posted photos of vacations to St. Bart's and Aspen. My mother would show me those photos on her tablet, her face glowing with reflected glory. "Look at them, Elena. Look how happy they are. Julian just landed a massive new client. They are thinking of buying a vacation home." I would nod, swallow my fatigue, and head back to the hospital. I felt like a ghost haunting the edges of their bright, expensive lives. I was the engine room of the family ship, dark, greasy, and hidden below the waterline, while they were the white sails catching the sun. The first crack in the porcelain appeared 6 months ago. I was visiting the house to drop off a check for my father bi-weekly physical therapy. My mother was in the garden, and I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. On the counter was a pile of mail. Usually my mother was meticulous about hiding the bills, but she must have been distracted. I saw a letter from a debt collection agency addressed to Brooke. It was sitting right on top. Against my better judgment, I looked at it. It was a final notice for an unpaid credit card balance of $22,000. My heart did a strange, jagged flip in my chest. Brooke? The woman who just posted a photo of a new $4,000 handbag? I heard my mother's footsteps on the porch and quickly stepped away. When she came in, she looked at me with that familiar, slightly disappointed expression she always wore when she saw me in my scrubs. "You look haggard, Elena," she said, reaching for the mail and sliding it into a drawer without looking at it. "You really should try some of that cream Brooke uses, though I suppose it is out of your price range." I felt a spark of something hot and sharp flicker in my gut. It was the first time I felt the surface of my patience begin to blister. I looked at the drawer where she had hidden the letter. Then I looked at her hand. She was wearing a new gold watch. "Is Dad feeling any better?" I asked, my voice sounding tight in my own ears. "Oh, you know," she sighed, putting on her martyr face. "It is a struggle every day. We are just so lucky we have Brooke and Julian to keep our spirits up. They are bringing over a bottle of vintage wine tonight. Julian says it is important to celebrate the small victories." That night I went home and did something I had never done before. I sat down at my laptop and started looking through the digital records of the hospital where my father was supposedly receiving his treatments. As an employee, I had limited access, but I knew the system. I searched for Robert Collins. There were no records of a cardiac rehab appointment in the last 3 years. There were no prescriptions filled for the expensive heart medication I had been paying for. The room felt suddenly very cold. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my eyes, and for the first time in my life, I felt the icy clarity of a woman who has been a fool for far too long. For the next 3 weeks, I moved through my shifts like a ghost. I was a professional at masking my internal state. In the emergency room, you learn to compartmentalize. You can have a patient life literally slipping through your fingers, and 5 minutes later you have to be calm and collected for the next person in line. I applied that same clinical detachment to my own family. I did not stop sending the money, not yet. I needed to see exactly how deep the rot went. If I stopped the flow now, they would just scurry into the shadows and I would never find the truth. So, I played my part. I was the tired, dutiful daughter. I wore my stained scrubs to Sunday brunch and listened to my mother talk about Brooke's new Italian leather sofa and Julian's latest promotion. "He is on the fast track to senior partner," my mother braggled, sipping her mimosa. "They are thinking of hosting a charity gala in the spring. Of course it will be very exclusive. Brooke is already looking at gowns in the city." I looked at Brooke across the table. She was wearing a silk blouse that cost more than my monthly rent, but her hands were shaking. She kept glancing at her phone, her eyes darting around the room with a frantic, hunted energy. She looked like a patient in the middle of a panic attack trying to pretend they were just out of breath. "That is wonderful, Brooke," I said, my voice as flat as a heart monitor on a dead man. "The firm must be very happy with Julian's performance." "They adore him," Brooke snapped, a bit too quickly. "He is practically running the place." 2 days later, I used my lunch break to drive to the city. I went to the prestigious law firm of Miller & Associates. I did not go inside. I just sat in my car in the parking garage and watched. I watched the lawyers in their $3,000 suits stream out for lunch. Julian was not among them. I returned the next morning at 8. I waited for 2 hours. Julian never arrived. I eventually walked into the lobby, approached the receptionist, and asked for Julian Hayes. The young woman behind the desk looked at me with a mixture of pity and professional coldness. "Mr. Hayes is no longer with the firm," she said. "Since when?" I asked, my heart hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. "He was let go 14 months ago," she replied. 14 months. For over a year, my sister and her husband had been living a lie, and my parents had been the ones funding the illusion. Or rather, I had been. Every emergency surgery, every experimental drug, every leak in my parents' roof had been a funnel, taking my sweat and my overtime and pouring it into Brooke's bottomless vanity. That evening, I went to my parents' house unannounced. I used my spare key and walked in through the kitchen door. The house was quiet, but I could hear voices coming from the living room. Low, urgent voices. "We need another 5,000, Mom," Brooke was whispering. "The bank sent a final notice on the SUV. If they repossess it, everyone will know. Julian can't look for a new position if he doesn't have the car. It's about the image." "I know, honey, I know," my mother's voice was soothing, the way she used to talk to me when I was a child before she realized I wasn't the daughter she wanted. "Elena is working extra shifts this weekend. She is bringing the check for your father's specialist on Monday." I told her the copay went up again. "Why can't she just give us more?" Brooke complained, her voice turning sharp and entitled. "She has no life. She has no husband, no kids, no taste. What is she even spending her money on? She lives in a box." "She is a simple girl, Brooke," my mother sighed. "She doesn't understand the pressure of a lifestyle like yours. She is happy as long as she feels needed. Just let me handle her." I stood in the kitchen, my hand gripping the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles turned white. The betrayal was not a sharp jab, it was a slow, crushing weight. They weren't just taking my money, they were mocking the very heart that led me to give it to them. They viewed my sacrifice as a character flaw, a weakness to be exploited. I looked down at the kitchen table. The silver spoons were laid out on a velvet cloth. My mother must have been getting ready to polish them. I picked one up. It felt wrong. I've spent 10 years handling medical equipment, delicate instruments, and heavy machinery. I know the weight of things. Solid silver has a specific satisfying heft. This spoon felt like a toy. It was light, almost flimsy. I turned it over in the dim light. There, near the base of the handle, was a tiny faint mark. Not a hallmark of quality, but the remains of a sticker that had been hastily scraped away. I scraped at the edge with my fingernail. A thin layer of silver-colored plating flaked off, revealing the dull gray zinc beneath. The real spoons were gone. My grandmother's legacy, the one thing my mother claimed was too sacred for me to touch, had been sold off to pay for a month of Julian Country Club fees or perhaps a pair of shoes Brooke just had to have. These were fakes. They were placeholders in a museum of lies. I put the spoon back exactly where I found it. I walked out of the house as silently as I had entered. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the darkened windows of the home where I grew up. I felt a strange sensation then. It was a coldness, spreading from the center of my chest out to my fingertips. It was the feeling of an emotional freeze. When a patient goes into shock, the body pulls all the blood from the extremities to protect the heart. That is what I was doing. I was protecting what was left of myself. I would not scream. I would not cry. I would not give them the satisfaction of my pain. I was a nurse. I knew how to handle a wound. You clean it, you debride the dead tissue, and you stitch it shut. Stay with me because it only got worse from there. If you have ever felt invisible in your own family, tell me what you would have done. I pulled my phone out and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It was an old friend from nursing school whose father was a private investigator. I need a favor, I said when he picked up. I need to know everything about my sister's bank accounts, and I need it by the end of the week. The file arrived on a rainy Tuesday, 3 days before my parents' 35th anniversary dinner. It was a thick manila envelope, hand-delivered to the hospital's reception desk. I waited until my lunch break, sitting in the fluorescent hum of the cafeteria to open it. I did not eat, I just read. The private investigator had been thorough. He had tracked every cent of the $3,000 I sent home every month for the last 5 years. It was a map of betrayal, drawn in black and white. My father's medical bills were a complete fiction. My mother had been using a basic photo editing program to alter old receipts from a minor procedure he had years ago. She changed the dates. She added zeros to the totals. She had turned my father's aging body into a fraudulent ATM. But the money did not stay with my parents. The investigator had found a secondary trail. Within 48 hours of every deposit I made, my mother would transfer 80% of the funds to an account belonging to Brooke. The spreadsheet showed where that money went. It did not go to mortgage payments or utility bills. It went to high-end boutiques, luxury spas, and a 5-star hotel in the city where Brooke spent 3 nights a week while Julian was supposedly away on business trips. Then came the second reveal, the one that made the air in my lungs feel like liquid lead. The investigator had included several photographs. They were not of Julian. They showed Brooke in the lobby of that hotel, draped over a man 10 years younger than her, a struggling actor she had met at a gallery opening. In one photo, my mother was standing right there with them, smiling as the young man loaded shopping bags into the trunk of Brooke's SUV. My mother wasn't just funding Brooke's lifestyle, she was funding Brooke's affair. She was paying for the hotel rooms and the expensive dinners to keep my sister happy, all while Julian sat at home, oblivious and unemployed, thinking his wife was out networking to save their social standing. My parents were so desperate to maintain the illusion of Brooke's perfect life that they were willing to sacrifice my sanity, my future, and my very soul to pay for her infidelity. I looked at the final page. It was a copy of the pawn shop receipt for the real silver spoons. They had been sold 3 years ago for $4,280. The name on the signature line was not Brooke Seth. It was my mother. Not just an accomplice, I whispered to the empty cafeteria. The architect. I felt a strange, cold vibration in my hands. It was the same feeling I get just before a patient heart stops, that split second of absolute silence where you know exactly what needs to be done. I didn't feel like crying anymore. The heat in my gut had turned into a steady, frozen light. I spent the next 48 hours making my own preparations. I did not call a lawyer. Not yet. I did not confront them. I went to the bank. I spoke to a forensic accountant I had met through the hospital legal department. I gathered every original check, every forged medical bill, and every photograph from the investigator. I put them into neat, professional folders. I also did something a bit more creative. I went to the attic of my parents' house while they were out at a pre-anniversary lunch. I found the box where my mother kept her archives. Beneath a pile of old recipes, I found what I was looking for, the baby monitor my mother used when she was babysitting Brooke's neighbor child. It was a high-end model, the kind that connected to a base station in the kitchen but had a highly sensitive microphone. I hid the base station in the back of the silverware hutch, plugged in and synced to my phone. I tested it. The audio was crystal clear. Every word spoken at that dining table would be recorded and transmitted directly to my device. The night of the anniversary dinner arrived. I drove to the restaurant, a place so expensive that the valet probably made more in tips than I did in an hour of saving lives. I wore my best dress, a simple black wrap that made me look invisible, which was exactly what I wanted. I wanted them to forget I was there until it was too late. When I walked into the private dining room, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and arrogance. My mother was wearing a new diamond necklace, one I recognized from the boutiques in Brooke's bank statements. My father looked healthy, his face flushed with wine, not a hint of the cardiac distress I had been paying to treat for half a decade. Brooke and Julian were there, looking like the cover of a luxury magazine, though I could see the cracks in Brooke's foundation. Her smile was too bright, her laughter too shrill. "Oh, Elena," my mother said, barely looking up as I sat down. "You actually cleaned up well. For a nurse. Happy anniversary, Mom." "Dad," I said. I placed a small, beautifully wrapped box on the table. "I brought you a special gift, to celebrate 35 years of commitment." "Is it another check?" Brooke asked, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Because honestly, Elena, that would be the most useful thing you could give them. Their expenses are so high lately." I smiled. It was the first real smile I had given her in years. It was the smile of a predator who knows the trap is already set. "Something like that," I replied. The dinner proceeded like a slow-motion car crash. My mother spent the first 3 courses praising Brooke's refined tastes and Julian's stellar career, all while making side-eye comments about my drab existence. Every time I reached for my water, she would make a comment about my rough hands. Every time I stayed silent, she took it as a sign of my inferiority. Then came the Wagyu beef, the peak of the evening. My mother held up her wine glass, her face glowing with a toxic mixture of pride and cruelty. "I want to make a toast," she announced, her voice carrying across the room to the other guests. "To my beautiful daughter Brooke, who has given us so much to be proud of, and to Julian, for being the man this family deserves." She paused, her eyes landing on me with a sudden sharp venom. "And I suppose we should mention Elena, though I really do wish you would stop telling people you work in a hospital. It is so manual. Elena, you should be grateful we even let you sit at this table after you humiliated this family by choosing a career in bedpans instead of a real profession like your sister." The table went silent. Julian looked uncomfortable. Brooke looked triumphant. My father just kept eating his steak. I felt the phone in my pocket vibrate. The recording was live. The trap was ready. I set my fork down and looked at the silver spoon in her hand. "That spoon is fake, Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but it carried like a gunshot. "What did you say?" she hissed, her face reddening. "The silver spoons," I said, leaning forward. "The real ones were sold 3 years ago at a pawn shop on 4th Street. You signed the receipt. I have a copy in my bag." My mother's hand began to shake. The fake silver spoon clattered against the porcelain plate. "I don't know what you are talking about," she stammered. "I think you do," I said, standing up slowly. "And I think Julian would be very interested to know exactly what you've been doing with the $36,000 a year I've been sending for Dad heart medication, the money that actually went to Brooke's hotel rooms in the city." Julian's head snapped toward Brooke. Brooke's face went the color of ash. The silence that followed was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, suffocating weight of a building about to collapse. Julian looked from me to Brooke, his face twisting into a mask of confusion and growing horror. My father sat frozen, a piece of Wagyu beef still speared on his fork, halfway to his mouth. My mother, however, was the first to find her voice. It was a sharp, jagged thing, stripped of all its usual polished elegance. "You are lying," she hissed, her eyes darting to the other tables in the distance, checking if anyone was watching. "You are just bitter and jealous because your sister has a life you could never dream of. You have always been the difficult one, Elena, the one who wanted to ruin everything for everyone else." I did not flinch. I reached into my small clutch bag and pulled out a stack of high-resolution photographs. I fanned them out on the white linen tablecloth like a deck of cards. There was Brooke laughing in the hotel lobby. There was the young man, his arm draped possessively over her shoulder. And there, in the corner of the third photo, was my mother, handing him a shopping bag from a designer boutique. "This was last Thursday," I said, my voice calm and steady, the way it is when I am explaining a procedure to a terrified patient. "The day you called me, Mom, crying because Dad's heart monitor supposedly broke and you needed $1,200 for a replacement. It seems the replacement was actually a pair of Italian loafers for Brooke's friend." Julian grabbed one of the photos. His knuckles were so white they looked like polished bone. He looked at Brooke, who had started to hyperventilate. "Brooke," Julian's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. "Who is this?" "Julian, honey, it is not what it looks like," Brooke stammered, her voice thin and high. He is a consultant. I was helping him with a project." "Mom was there. Tell him, Mom." "It is true, Julian," my mother jumped in, her voice frantic. "She was just being kind. You know how Brooke is. She is a saint. Elena is twisting this. She is a nurse, she sees trauma everywhere. She is mentally unstable from work." I laughed then. It was a short, dry sound that had no humor in it. "I am unstable. I am the only person in this room who is living in reality. Julian, you might want to check the joint accounts you thought were empty. Or better yet, call your old firm. I already did. They told me you were let go 14 months ago for gross negligence. The table erupted. Julian turned on Brooke, his voice rising as the humiliation of being exposed in a room full of the city's elite began to sink in. Brooke started to sob, great, ugly heaving sounds that lacked any of her usual grace. My father finally dropped his fork. It hit the plate with a sharp metallic ring that seemed to signal the end of an era. Enough, my mother shrieked. She stood up, her chair screeching against the floor. So what if we use the money? You have plenty of it, Elena. You have no husband, no children, no expenses. We are your family. You owed us that money for everything we did for you. What did you do for me, Mom? I asked, looking her directly in the eyes. You spent my entire childhood telling me I was the plain one, the rough one, the one who had to work because I wasn't pretty enough to be taken care of. You took my paychecks for 10 years. You stole my grandmother's silver spoons and replaced them with zinc fakes from a discount store. You watched me work 80-hour weeks until my back ached and my eyes bled, just so Brooke could pretend to be a socialite with a man she was cheating on. It was for the family name, she yelled, her face contorted. I had to protect our image. You wouldn't understand. You were always happy in the dirt, Elena. You like the smell of blood and sickness. It suits you. I felt the final string snap inside me. It wasn't anger. It was a profound, icy release. I reached out and picked up the fake silver spoon from beside my mother's plate. I held it up to the light, letting everyone see the gray metal peeking through the cheap plating. This is your image, Mom, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, clinical whisper. It is a lie. It is cheap, it is hollow, and it is falling apart. And here is the part you really won't like. I leaned in closer, my shadow falling over her expensive anniversary dinner. I stopped the automatic transfers this morning, all of them. And since Dad's medical bills were forged, I've already filed a report for insurance fraud. The hospital legal team is very interested in how their letterhead ended up on those fake invoices you sent me. My mother's face went from red to a ghostly translucent white. She sank back into her chair, her hand clutching the diamond necklace I had unknowingly paid for. You wouldn't, she whispered. You are my daughter. No, I said, standing up and smoothing out my dress. I was your bank, and today, the bank is closed. I've already moved my things out of the storage unit I was paying for. You will never see another cent from me. Not for the house, not for the cars, and certainly not for your image. I looked at Brooke, who was still crying, and Julian, who looked like a man who had just woken up in the middle of a nightmare. My father looked at me, and for the first time in my life I saw something like shame in his eyes, but it was too late. I have spent a decade reviving people who didn't want to be saved. I was done performing CPR on this family. The bill for this dinner is already taken care of, I said, placing the fake silver spoon in the center of the table. Consider it my final gift. Enjoy your anniversary, Mom. It is the last one you will be able to afford. I turned and walked out of the room. My heels clicked rhythmically on the marble floor, a steady, confident beat. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could hear the shouting start up again behind me, the sound of a family finally forced to look at the wreckage they had created. I stepped out into the cool night air. The city lights were blurred by a light mist, but for the first time in years I could breathe. My lungs felt clear, my hands were steady. I walked to my 10-year-old car, and as I pulled out of the parking lot, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt like the only person in the world who was truly alive. I did not change my phone number right away. I wanted to hear the voicemails, not out of malice, but for documentation. My mother called 17 times that first night. Her voice cycled through every stage of manipulation I had grown to know so well. First, it was the screaming outrage, calling me a traitor and a cold-blooded monster. Then came the frantic bargaining, promising to pay me back every cent if I just wouldn't call the insurance company. Finally, by 4 in the morning, it was the weeping, pathetic guilt-tripping about my father's fragile heart. I didn't answer. I didn't even cry. I just sat in my quiet apartment, listening to the rain, and forwarded every single recording to my lawyer and the forensic accountant. The collapse happened faster than I expected. When you build a house out of lies, you only need to pull one brick to bring the whole thing down. Julian filed for divorce 3 days after that dinner. He didn't have a job, and he didn't have a house, but he had enough dignity left to realize he had been a supporting actor in a very expensive, very twisted play. Brooke moved back into my parents' guest room, but they couldn't keep the house for long. Without my $3,000 a month, the reality of their mounting debt and the impending legal investigation into the forged medical receipts finally caught up to them. They were forced to sell everything: the designer furniture, the German SUVs, and even the diamond necklace my mother had worn to the dinner. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the far edge of the city, in a neighborhood my mother used to sneer at when we drove past it. I didn't stay to watch the final pieces fall. I took a position as a flight nurse in a different state, 300 miles away. I wanted a life where the only emergencies I handled were the ones that happened in the air, not the ones manufactured at a dining table. For the first time in 10 years, my paycheck belongs entirely to me. I no longer live like a monk. I bought a small, sturdy house with a porch that catches the morning sun. There is no grand dining room, and there are no lilies in the hallway, but there is a peace here that I never thought I would find. A few weeks ago, I was unpacking the last of my boxes when I found a small velvet pouch I had forgotten I had. I opened it and found a single tarnished silver spoon. It was the only real one left, something I had tucked away years ago when I was a teenager, before the lies started. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about polishing it. I thought about keeping it as a reminder of where I came from. But then I looked at my hands. They were steady. They were clean. I didn't need a symbol of old-world dignity to feel like I was worth something. I am a woman who saves lives. I am a woman who survived her own family. I walked out to my backyard and buried that spoon deep under the roots of an old oak tree. I didn't do it with anger. I did it with a sense of finality. I was burying the last of the Collins legacy. I am not a bank. I am not a disappointment. I am not the rough daughter. I am Elena, and for the first time in 32 years, I am finally home. If this story meant something to you, or if you have ever had to set a boundary that felt like a bridge burning, leave your thoughts below. I read every one of them. And please, subscribe for more stories about finding the strength to walk away. It is the hardest thing you will ever do, but I promise you, the air is better on the other side.